There's a kind of darkness on the highway that no headlight can fight. A darkness that feels like it's watching you back. Truckers don't talk about it openly. The blackouts, the sudden silence, the nights when the world around your rig just disappears. But every driver who's lived long enough out here has faced that one moment when the road feels wrong, when the mirrors show shadows that shouldn't be there, when something sits in the passenger seat even though you know you're alone. These stories come from those nights. Before we start, take a breath, and if you're new here, hit subscribe. You don't want to be alone the next time the dark decides to follow you home. My name is Robert Kane. I've been running heavy rigs for more than 2 decades, mostly northern freight. Isolated highways where towns are few and the nights stretch longer than the imagination. I've seen black ice, whiteouts, and deer that appeared out of nowhere, but nothing prepared me for what happened that night. It was early November, just after midnight. My route took me along Highway 112, the northern stretch that threads through forests, old logging roads, and abandoned settlements. I was hauling a refrigerated load of produce from Winnipeg to a small hub near Thompson. The Kenworth W900 I was driving handled like a dream, diesel humming steady, tires gripping the frosted asphalt. The CB was quiet, save for the occasional static and the drone of the engine. Weather reports warned of dense fog, and as I approached the higher elevations near the river gorge, visibility dropped to barely 30 feet. The world outside the cab became a muted haze of gray and white. Streetlights were scarce, the pavement slick with ice forming under the faint moonlight. I had been driving for nearly 12 hours, but I felt alert. Experience tells you that fatigue is a subtle predator, creeping in when you least expect it. That's when I saw it, or rather, I thought I saw it. A bridge appeared through the fog, arching over what I assumed was the river below. I eased onto the approach, headlights cutting thin beams through the mist. The structure looked solid, icy sheen on its steel beams, snow drifting across its deck. I gripped the wheel tighter, but something didn't feel right. There was no sound of water beneath me, no rushing current, no frozen expanse. Nothing. My heart kicked. I slammed the brakes lightly, expecting the ABS to hum, tires to protest. The truck slowed, but the bridge didn't vanish. It remained, gleaming like frost under my headlights. The fog swirled around it, thickening, curling into shapes that reminded me vaguely of faces. I stepped out, just for a moment, the cold biting through my jacket. My boots crunched against ice. I leaned over the edge, and what I saw or didn't see made my stomach turn. Nothing, just a drop, black emptiness stretching down into fog so thick I couldn't see the bottom. Not a river, not rocks, just a void. I scrambled back into the cab, heart hammering. Rational explanations fought their way through my mind. Fog and light playing tricks, ice reflecting headlights, maybe fatigue, though I knew I wasn't that tired. But the tactile sense of the bridge beneath my tires, the vibration through the frame of the rig, felt too real. I inched forward. As I moved, the bridge seemed to solidify. Steel girders aligned with the fog, appearing where moments before nothing existed. My headlights bounced off the icy surface, throwing ghostly reflections onto the fog. I could feel the cold wind cutting through the vents, pressing into the cab, whispering along the dashboard. The W900's engine thrummed beneath me, solid, real, but every instinct screamed that I was crossing into something impossible. Halfway across, the CB crackled. Static first, then a voice so faint I thought I'd imagined it. Robert. My head snapped to the mic. My name. Robert. Turn back. No one was there. No other trucks. No trucks ever travel this route at this hour. Only me. I swallowed hard. My hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles white. The wind outside roared now, rattling the cab, shaking the mirrors. My breath fogged inside, forming streaks on the glass. Frost began to creep along the edges of the windshield, like icy fingers reaching for me. I told myself to stay calm. Rational explanations. Cold air, ice vibration, auditory hallucination from the long drive. But the vibrations through the floor, the tremor in the steel under my wheels, told another story. Something was wrong. Ahead, the bridge deck shimmered, and I saw shapes in the fog again. Thin, elongated, standing motionless. Shadows that didn't move like humans, but rather like reflections of some memory etched into the air. I blinked and they vanished. The last span of the bridge seemed to ripple, bending slightly as I drove. My steering corrected automatically, but the feeling of the deck beneath me became slippery, unreal, like driving on the surface of a dream. Then I reached the other side. The bridge was gone. Completely. Nothing but the frozen highway and treeline. No structure. Just black air and faint mist. My tires left prints in the frost, leading straight into nothing. I could see the marks in the snow, and they ended at the cliff's edge, where there was nothing to step onto. My breath caught in my chest. I slammed the brakes again, scanning the fog. Rationally, I knew the bridge must have been there seconds ago or had it. I could feel the steel in my hands. I had touched it. I had driven on it. The CB buzzed once more. Static, then the faint repetition of my name. Robert, don't go back. I didn't respond. I could only sit there, shaking, staring into the fog that was slowly swallowing the tire tracks. The wind gusted, carrying a smell I couldn't place. Metal and ozone, like lightning striking a frozen river, but no water existed. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time felt distorted, stretched by the weight of the impossible. Finally, I turned the rig around, retracing my path. Nothing appeared on the road. No bridge, no river, nothing. My own tire marks were the only proof I had ever crossed anything at all. Back on the main highway, the fog lifted slightly. The lights of distant towns appeared, welcoming but distant. My hands were still trembling. I tried the CB, the radio, even my phone, dead signals. The truck hummed normally, the road beneath solid and unquestionable. I drove the rest of the night in silence. The image of that bridge haunted me, not because it was dangerous, but because it didn't obey the rules of this world. Steel suspended over a void. A road that appeared when you moved and vanished when you stopped. Voices that knew my name. I reported the incident when I got back to the hub, half joking, half serious. The dispatcher listened politely, smiled, and chalked it up to fatigue and northern fog. But I knew. I had felt the vibrations, smelled the cold ozone, seen shadows bend above me. Something out there was aware, watching. Weeks later, I returned to that stretch of Highway 112 in daylight. No fog, no bridge, just the river gorge, real, frozen, completely ordinary. Yet when I examined the snow on the shoulders, I could faintly see impressions in patterns that weren't mine. Tire marks that ended abruptly at thin air. The thought sent chills through me. Since that night, I avoid driving that route after dark. I still haul freight north, but I take the detours, the longer ways. Every time I pass the northern forests in the dead of night, I glance toward the gorge, half expecting the bridge to materialize, half hoping it never will. Because I know it could. And when it does, it won't be waiting quietly. I still hear my name sometimes, carried in static on the CB when no one is there. Sometimes it whispers as I drive past the treeline, or in the hiss of air from my trailer brakes. I don't respond. I never respond. I survived that night. My truck is fine. My cargo arrived on time. But I carry the memory in the tremor of my hands, in the tightening of my chest when fog thickens, in the fleeting shadow in the corner of the mirrors. The bridge wasn't there, and yet it was, and the road hasn't forgotten. My name is Daniel Mercer. I've been hauling freight across northern routes for almost 18 years now, long enough to know the difference between fatigue and fear, between imagination and something that doesn't care whether you believe in it or not. This happened on Highway 8, the stretch that cuts through the upper tundra where towns thin out and the road feels less like a line and more like a suggestion. I was running a refrigerated load northbound, packaged food bound for a distribution hub that only existed because trucks like mine kept showing up on time. Departure was clean, paperwork checked, reefer unit steady at -5, weather clear, cold, and brutally quiet. It was just after midnight when the aurora came out. Up there, the northern lights aren't rare, but they're never routine either. They roll in slow, like the sky deciding to breathe. Green at first, faint ribbons stretching from horizon to horizon. I eased off the throttle a little, not out of awe but habit. Drivers slow down when the sky does something unexpected. Ice doesn't care if you're distracted. The CB was dead, which wasn't unusual that late. No chatter, no call-outs, just low static like the road thinking to itself. Outside temperature sat at -19 Celsius. Inside the cab was warm enough to forget the cold existed. At first, the lights were just lights. They shimmered gently above the windshield, reflected faintly in the chrome trim around my mirrors. The kind of thing you glance at, nod to yourself, and keep rolling. But 10 minutes in, they changed. Not color, shape. The ribbons began to fold inward, twisting into loops that looked intentional, like they were reacting to something below them. I checked my mirrors out of reflex, scanning for headlights or a convoy I hadn't noticed. Nothing. The road behind me was empty. Ahead, it vanished into a low fog that hugged the asphalt like breath against glass. Then I saw movement. Not on the road, in the sky. Within the aurora, darker patches formed, subtle at first. Shadows inside light. They stretched and contracted, bending like joints. I told myself it was an optical illusion. Charged particles, atmospheric nonsense I didn't understand and didn't need to. I blinked hard, took a sip of stale coffee, adjusted my seat. The shapes remained. They weren't random anymore. They moved together, drifting in the same direction I was driving, matching my speed. A prickle crept up my arms, goosebumps rising beneath my sleeves despite the warmth. I checked the time. 12:47 a.m. Checked my GPS route intact. Distance ticking down normally. Still, I felt watched. That's not something you want to admit to yourself on an empty highway. It sounds weak, irrational. So I did what drivers always do when something feels off. I looked for a mechanical explanation. I turned up the radio. Nothing but static. I switched to the CB, adjusted the squelch. A voice cut through briefly, warped and distant. "You see them too?" I froze. "Say again," I said, keeping my voice steady. Silence. The aurora brightened. Green shifted to pale blue, then streaks of white like frost cracks spreading across the sky. The shapes inside the lights became clearer, elongated forms that bent downward, as if leaning closer. I glanced at the side mirror. One of the shapes was reflected there, stretched across the curved chrome. It looked taller in reflection, thinner, almost human if you squinted the wrong way. I looked back up. It was closer. The light pulsed, and for a moment, the shadow inside it turned its head toward me. My GPS chimed, then went blank. The screen faded to black like it had lost power, though the rest of the dash stayed lit. My phone, mounted beside it, shut off a second later. No low battery warning, just dead. The engine note changed, not stalled, just muted, like the sound was being swallowed before it reached my ears. The steering wheel vibrated less beneath my hands, as if the road had softened. That's when I realized the lights weren't following the highway. They were following the truck. I slowed down to 40. The shapes slowed too. I sped up. They stretched forward, staying overhead, keeping pace effortlessly. The smell hit me next. Ozone, sharp and clean, mixed with cold metal, like standing near a transformer in winter. The air inside the cab felt heavier, pressing against my chest. "All right," I muttered. "Enough." I pulled onto the shoulder. The truck rolled to a stop with a soft hiss of air brakes. Snow crunched beneath the tires. The world went quiet in a way I hadn't heard before. No wind, no distant howl, nothing. Even the aurora seemed to hold its breath. The shapes gathered directly above me. They no longer drifted. They hovered. I stayed in the seat, hands resting lightly on the wheel. Years on the road teach you when not to move, when motion might be mistaken for invitation. The CB crackled again. This time, the voice was clear. "Daniel." My name. I didn't respond. The mirrors began to frost over from the edges inward, thin veins of ice crawling across the glass. In the reflection, the shapes leaned lower, their forms sharpening into something with limbs. Too many bends, too fluid to be right. Daniel, the voice said again, closer now. Not from the radio, from above. The aurora pulsed, and the light spilled downward, washing the cab in a sickly glow. I felt it on my skin, cold without being cold, like standing in shadow that weighed something. Images flickered through my mind. Roads I'd driven, nights I'd slept in the cab, faces of people I hadn't spoken to in years. Felt like being cataloged, measured, observed. I forced my hands back onto the wheel and turned the key. The engine hesitated, then roared to life, loud and sudden in the silence. The vibration returned, solid and real. The lights recoiled, not fast, reluctantly. I didn't wait to see more. I pulled back onto the highway and drove. For miles, the aurora followed at a distance, shapes thinning, retreating but never leaving. When dawn finally came, the lights faded into nothing, and the sky returned to its dull gray. My GPS rebooted. My phone turned back on. Everything worked like it always had. I told no one, but the next time I ran that route, the lights were there again. Watching, waiting. Now, every time I drive north under a clear winter sky, I keep my eyes forward. I don't admire the aurora anymore. I don't slow down, because I know they're still up there, and they know my name. My name is Ethan Cole. I've been driving long haul for just over 20 years, most of that time running northern routes where winter isn't a season so much as a permanent condition. I've crossed roads where the cold sharpens your thoughts and dulls your feelings at the same time. I've slept through blizzards that buried my tires halfway up the rims. I've seen men quit mid-route because the silence got too loud. What happened to me outside of Coldwater Ridge is the only thing I've never been able to put in a logbook. It was February, just past 2 a.m., the kind of hour where the world feels unfinished. I was hauling medical supplies eastbound, temperature-sensitive freight, tight deadline. My truck was a 2018 Volvo VNL, reliable, clean, no issues. The heater was working fine. Tires were good. Fuel topped off 2 hours earlier. Everything was normal, which is why it still bothers me how wrong it all became. The highway cut through a stretch of high plateau where the wind never stops moving. Snowbanks rose like walls on either side, hardened into ice by weeks of sub-zero air. The sky was clear, stars dimmed by a pale moon that gave everything a washed-out blue glow. No traffic in either direction. My CB was quiet, just a low hiss of static now and then, the sound of distance. I remember checking the outside temperature on the dash. -27 Fahrenheit. That's when I saw him. At first, I thought it was a trick of the headlights, a shadow bending wrong along the shoulder. But as I got closer, the shape sharpened into a person. A man walking against the wind, hunched, waving both arms over his head. No reflective gear, no flashlight, just a dark coat and boots crunching through snow that should have been impossible to walk in. I slowed instinctively. Any driver would. You don't leave someone out there in that cold. The headlights caught his face, and my stomach tightened. His skin was gray, not pale gray, like stone dusted with frost. Ice crusted his eyebrows and lashes. His beard was stiff, frozen solid against his jaw. His mouth moved, shouting something I couldn't hear through the glass. I rolled to a stop 20 feet ahead of him, hazard lights blinking. The cab felt suddenly too quiet, like the engine noise had dropped an octave. I cracked the window an inch. "You all right?" I shouted. He stumbled forward faster than he should have been able to, boots scraping ice. I remember thinking that his movements didn't match the cold. He should have been slow, rigid. Instead, he moved like urgency was holding him together. "Help," he said. His voice carried through the crack in the window, thin and brittle. "Please, don't leave me here." I reached for the passenger door handle. The moment I opened it, the cold hit me like a physical blow. Not just air pressure. My breath came out in a thick cloud, and before I could say another word, he was inside the cab. I didn't hear him climb in. He was just there. The door slammed shut behind him on its own. The temperature inside the cab dropped instantly. My dashboard fogged over. Frost crawled along the edges of the windshield like something alive. I could smell him, old ice, metal, and something underneath like damp earth that's been frozen too long. He sat rigid in the passenger seat, facing forward. His clothes were soaked through with frost, yet no snow fell from them. Ice glazed his hands, fingers curled inward as if they'd stiffened that way. I didn't look at him right away. I kept my hands locked on the steering wheel, knuckles whitening, trying to understand how the heater could fail that fast. "Sir," I said carefully, keeping my voice even, "you need medical help. We're a long way from—" He turned his head toward me. His eyes were open, but there was nothing behind them. Not emptiness, distance, like he was looking through me at something much farther down the road. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered. His breath didn't fog. I swallowed hard. "What happened to you?" For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to answer. The truck idled roughly beneath us, vibration fading, like the engine was struggling to stay awake. "They walked away," he said. "They always do." The CB radio crackled sharply, loud enough to make me flinch. A burst of static, then silence. I reached for the heater controls, turned them to full. Nothing changed. The air coming from the vents felt dead, like blowing through a freezer. "Sir," I said again, louder now, "I'm taking you to the next town." He smiled, and I wish he hadn't. The skin around his mouth cracked when it moved, fissures forming where frost had fused with flesh. "There is no town," he said softly. "Not anymore." That's when I noticed his legs. They were wrong, bent at angles that didn't make sense, like someone had twisted them and then frozen them that way. Ice coated the seams of his pants, thickest around the knees. "You stopped," he continued. "That's why you can hear me." A low vibration rolled through the cab, subtle but unmistakable. Not the engine. Something deeper, like the road itself humming. I reached for the door handle, every instinct screaming to get him out. "You shouldn't open it," he said without looking. "Not while we're here." My hand froze inches from the latch. "Where is here?" I asked. He turned fully toward me now. The frost in his beard flaked away, drifting upward instead of falling. His eyes reflected my dashboard lights like mirrors. "In the pause," he said. "Between miles." The windshield cracked, just a hairline fracture spreading from the bottom corner, ice threading through the glass. The GPS flickered, recalculating, spinning endlessly. Outside, the highway had gone silent. No wind, no movement. The world beyond the headlights looked flat, unfinished, like a photograph that hadn't fully loaded. "Listen," he whispered. The CB radio came alive again, but this time it wasn't static. Footsteps, crunching snow, slow, measured, coming from behind the truck. I shook my head hard. No, I'm not doing this." "You already did," he said. "You stopped." Frost bloomed across the inside of the windshield, delicate at first, then spreading in branching patterns. Letters began to form. My name, ETHAN. The heater screamed, then died completely. The cab lights flickered, casting his face in harsh white for a split second. In that flash, I saw something beneath the ice, dark, bruising, deep and old, like he'd been frozen while still screaming. "Please," I said, not sure who I was begging. "Just get out." He nodded slowly, as if I'd finally said the right thing. "When you hear the footsteps reach the door," he said, "drive." The footsteps stopped, right beside my door. I didn't look, couldn't. My entire body felt numb, like the cold had reached inside me and wrapped around my spine. "Go," he whispered. I slammed my foot down on the accelerator. The truck surged forward, tires screaming against ice. The world snapped back into motion violently. Wind howled. Snow blasted across the headlights. The footsteps vanished. The passenger seat was empty. The cab was still freezing, but the frost on the windshield began to melt rapidly, dripping down like sweat. My name faded, leaving faint streaks behind. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I drove until dawn burned the sky pale gray and my hands stopped shaking. When I finally pulled into a truck stop hours later, I checked the passenger seat. There was a wet imprint. Not water. Melted frost. Shaped like a man who'd been sitting there patiently, waiting. I reported it in my own way. Told dispatch I'd encountered a hypothermia victim who disappeared. They chalked it up to exhaustion. Told me to take mandatory rest. Weeks later, I learned about an accident on that stretch of highway. A decade old. A bus slid off the road in a storm. Survivors said a man had walked away into the cold before help arrived. His body was never found. I still drive. I still take northern routes. But I don't stop for pedestrians anymore. Not in that cold. Not when the road is too quiet. Sometimes, when the heater struggles and the CB goes dead silent, I feel the temperature drop just a little too fast. Sometimes I swear I smell ice and old metal. And sometimes, just for a second, I see frost forming on the glass, shaping letters, waiting. I still hear footsteps every time the highway goes quiet. Here's a fully expanded 2,000-word cinematic horror story based on your truck that followed its own grave idea. Written in the immersive first-person style you requested. Name's Garrett Mills. I've been a long-haul driver for nearly 18 years. My rig is an old 2016 Peterbilt 579. Keeps me alive on the long, lonely roads of the northern states. I know these highways like the back of my hand. Every dip, every guardrail, every faded mile marker. But there's one stretch of road, along Lake Winona, that still keeps me awake at night, even after all these years. That road, it has a voice. It started almost casually. My CB radio has always been my companion. 4 years, I've trusted it for traffic, weather, and the occasional casual conversation with another driver. That's why the first time it happened, I thought it was just static interference from the lake. It was around 10:30 p.m., mid-January. The lake was a sheet of black ice under the muted glow of a waning moon. Frost clung to my windshield. The temperature was well below zero. My route was standard. Haul a load of frozen produce from Duluth to Fargo. The cab was warm, coffee in the holder, heater humming. CB set to channel 19 as always. A crackle, then a faint voice. Red truck. Take exit 7 now. I froze. My hand hovered over the shifter. The road ahead was clear. No construction, no emergency vehicles, no reason at all to exit. But something in the tone, precise, urgent, almost clinical, made my stomach turn. I obeyed, pulling off the highway. Tires hissed on frost and scattered gravel. My rig groaned under the sudden turn. Minutes later, from the main road behind me, came the sound of screeching brakes, metal twisting. I looked back. A tanker had jackknifed it across both lanes. A highway patrol car arrived moments later, lights flashing. I parked on the shoulder, still shaking, heart racing, unable to comprehend. I had no way of knowing that accident would happen. The voice had saved me. At first, I thought it was coincidence, a weird one-off fluke. But the following nights proved otherwise. Every time I drove past Lake Winona, the CB would crackle, that low static buzzing in my ears like a warning bell. Sometimes it was a whisper, red truck, slow, slippery ice ahead. Sometimes more urgent, exit now, tanker overturned. I began to dread the route, but I couldn't stop listening. I didn't want to ignore it, not after that first night. One night, I remember vividly, I left Duluth around midnight. The wind howled outside, rattling the cab. Snow fell steadily, frosting the windshield despite the wipers. My rig hummed along the highway, tires crunching frost and packed snow. CB silent at first, just static. Then the voice came, clear and calm. Red truck. Merge left, tractor trailer ahead, loose load. I obeyed, heart pounding. As I merged, I caught a glimpse of a semi swaying dangerously, a pallet of frozen goods teetering on the edge. Seconds later, the back doors burst open, crates sliding across the highway. A disaster narrowly avoided, and I sat there shaking, watching chaos unfold behind me, still barely believing I had been warned. The voice was always precise. It never screamed, never shouted. It never explained itself. Just facts. clear instructions, directions I could follow. And every time I did, I avoided catastrophe. Every time I ignored it, well, I've never admitted to ignoring it. Some nights, I think I tested it, but the price was too high to do it twice. I began to notice subtle patterns. The voice only spoke when I drove alone. Never when I had another trucker riding with me. Only late at night, when the roads were dark and empty. Sometimes, I'd hear my own name, just barely, over the static. Garrett, exit 7 now. Never mispronounced. Never generic. Always personal. The atmosphere on those nights was thick, oppressive, almost physical. Frost glazed the mirrors. Fog clung to the lake's edge. The cab would feel colder despite the heater. A metallic scent, like ozone, like ice striking a power line, would cling to the air. And sometimes the steering wheel would vibrate ever so slightly, subtle enough to doubt myself, but unmistakable if I focused. I remember one night in particular. A full moon hung low over Lake Winona, casting long shadows across the highway. My rig hummed along, frost sparkling like shattered glass. The CB buzzed, low static, almost impatient. Then the voice. Red truck. Slow. Black ice patch ahead. I eased my rig forward cautiously. I could feel the cab shift slightly, the tires slipping ever so faintly on invisible ice. It was precise, almost predictive. My chest tightened. My stomach roiled. I exhaled through clenched teeth and obeyed, slowing to a crawl. I passed the exact patch of black ice without incident. But the sensation of something watching, guiding, lingering in the cab, it didn't leave. After that night, I began to wonder if the voice knew more than just accidents. Sometimes it hinted at something deeper, something darker, though never directly. I'd hear names over the static. Watch for Carter, it said once. Winona exit caution trailer. Names that weren't mine, drivers I didn't know. Accidents I'd later read about in dispatch logs. Sometimes fatalities. And yet, it never misled me. Never wrong. I started recording every transmission. Played them back. The voice was clear, calm, almost emotionless, yet impossible. Static came and went naturally, but the instructions were flawless. Precise timing. Perfect predictions. And yet, every recording showed nothing out of the ordinary. Just me driving, nothing remarkable captured. No other voices. No explanation. The psychological toll was heavy. Driving past Lake Winona became an obsession. I check my mirrors obsessively. I'd glance at the lake itself, dark and still, reflecting the moonlight like an endless black mirror. Shadows seemed to move at the edge of vision. Fog rolled in faster than it should. And every time the voice spoke, I felt both relief and dread. Relief for the warning, dread for what it might mean, for why it knew, and for the accidents it couldn't prevent for others. Once I stayed off that route for weeks, avoided the highway entirely, but the load schedule wouldn't allow it forever. The road calls, the freight calls, and I returned, heart hammering, fingers clutching the wheel. And the CB greeted me as always, static first, then the voice. The most terrifying night came in early spring. Ice had melted from the shoulders, snow gone from the treeline, but the lake was calm, eerily so. I had a heavy load, refrigerated freight, and I was running behind. Midnight, exhaustion creeping in. I gripped the wheel tightly, eyes flicking between mirrors and the dark horizon. The CB crackled violently, then silence, then the voice. Red truck, exit 7. Overturned tanker, immediate danger. I slammed the brakes, steering off the highway onto the exit. The tires bit into gravel. Behind me, the unmistakable sound of screeching metal, twisting steel. I glanced in the rearview. Flames licked the asphalt where a tanker had jackknifed. The smell of burnt diesel and rubber filled the air. I parked on the shoulder, shaking, heart pounding so hard I thought my chest would burst. The CB went silent again. Nothing, just the faint hum of my engine and the whispering wind over the lake. I had obeyed. I had survived. But every time I replay that night, I can still smell the fire, feel the vibration in my seat, the frozen lake watching silently beside me. I've tried to rationalize it. Maybe some signal from a dispatch system gone haywire. Maybe a psychic anomaly in the power lines along the lake. Maybe something else, but none of it fits. The voice predicts accidents no one could have known. It's personal, precise, and it doesn't miss. I drive that route less now. Sometimes I take the long way even if it costs me hours. But when I'm forced to pass Lake Winona at night, I check my mirrors constantly, grip the wheel tight, and wait for the static. And when the voice comes, I obey. Every time. Because I know that if I don't, I might not make it through. The CB never explains itself. It never asks why. It doesn't comfort or threaten. It just informs. But in its quiet, precise tone, I feel the weight of inevitability. A reminder that the road is alive in ways I can't understand. That some accidents can be avoided, but some things can't be reasoned with. I don't know if it's benevolent or malevolent. I don't know if it watches me or all of us. I only know it speaks. I only know it warns. And I only know that every time I hear it, I obey. Because the highway doesn't forgive mistakes. And Lake Winona doesn't forget. Even now, years later, every time I hear static on the CB, my pulse quickens. I still grip the wheel like that first night. I still smell ozone and burnt rubber in the cold air. And I still obey. Because the radio never lies. Name's Ryan Carter. I've been driving freight through the northern corridors for over a decade. Mostly in my 2017 Kenworth W900. That rig is my lifeline, reliable, heavy, and familiar. I know these highways blindfolded. Every curve, every dip, every mile marker. But that night, something broke the rules I've lived by for years. It was around 11:43 p.m. on Highway 84, a lonely stretch lined with pine and spruce. The temperature hovered just below freezing. Frost glittered under my headlights. The CB had been quiet for miles. A couple of trucks passed hours earlier, but now the road was empty. I was hauling timber, nothing urgent, just a standard load, but I was exhausted. 14 hours in, eyes burning, shoulders stiff. A deer leapt out from the roadside, sudden and loud. I slammed the brakes and swerved instinctively. Tires skidded on the frost. The rig fishtailed, hugging the edge of the forest. I brought it to a stop as best I could, heart hammering. That's when I saw it. Headlights, through the trees, moving parallel to me, not on the road, not on any path I knew existed, just moving, slow, steady, matching my every shift and movement. I squinted, trying to convince myself it was a reflection, another vehicle on the road. But the angle was impossible. No road, just trees, snow, and shadows. I shifted into drive, careful, slow at first. The headlights followed. I increased speed. So did it. Every turn I made, it mirrored me perfectly. Every swerve, every correction. My knuckles whitened on the wheel. The truck felt heavier, the suspension responding differently to the dirt and ice under the tires. The cab seemed alive with tension. Cold air seeped through the seals. My breath fogged the windows. I hit the CB. Anyone there? My voice was steady, but my stomach roiled. Static. Then, faintly, a voice, distorted, almost playful, almost like someone knew exactly where I was. I tightened my grip, rationalizing. Another driver, maybe, but every logical explanation failed. No road, no tracks in the dirt beside me, nothing that could hold a rig. And yet the lights stayed. The trees pressed in. Shadows stretched unnaturally. The rig's vibration under my hands changed, almost like the world itself was moving with me, bending around the tires. Goosebumps crawled up my neck despite the heater blasting full. I could smell it then. Ozone, cold metal, a faint hint of burnt rubber, like the truck behind me had just come off a drag strip. I floored it. Heart pounding, engine roaring, tires digging into frozen dirt and fallen leaves. The headlights followed, flawless, in sync. I tried every trick I knew. Sharp turns, slowing, jerking left and right, but they copied everything. Mirrors reflected only the forest, no truck, no shadows, nothing solid. but I felt it, pressing from behind, waiting, mocking. After what felt like an eternity, the tree line finally opened into a clearing. The highway resumed, black asphalt, familiar lane markers. The headlights were gone, just vanished. No skid marks off the road, no tire tracks in the dirt where they should have been. Only mine, stretching from the moment I swerved for the deer. I stopped, pulled the rig fully onto the road shoulder. The cab was silent now. Radio dead, CB static gone. Cold air still lingered, metallic in my nostrils, but the forest had retreated to normal. Nothing moved, nothing breathed, only the sound of my engine idling, pumping heat into the cab. I sat there a long time, gripping the wheel, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Fatigue, maybe, stress, tunnel vision. But fatigue doesn't explain the smell, the vibration, the perfect mimicry. Fatigue doesn't explain how it vanished the moment I reached the open highway. I drove the rest of the way in silence, refusing to look at the mirrors. Every mile felt unreal. Every turn felt too precise, too measured. I avoided that stretch of woods for weeks, choosing longer, less familiar routes. Even now, I avoid driving there at night when the forest shadows stretch long and the fog creeps low. I've told a few colleagues. Couple laughed it off. Headlights in the fog. Mirages. Others nodded, silent, like they'd been through it themselves and didn't want to say too much. But I know what I saw, felt, experienced. There was something there, something that could move where no road exists, that could mimic, mirror, follow. Waiting, patient, perfect. I still remember that smell. Ozone, metallic, faintly burned rubber. The subtle vibration under my hands, almost like the ground was alive. And the headlights, they weren't just lights. They were intent, watching, tracking, waiting for me to make a mistake. Sometimes late at night I dream I'm back there. Tires skidding, forest pressing close, headlights in the trees. Every instinct screaming to run, to drive faster, but no way out. And every time I wake, the rig is still in the driveway, the engine off, but my palms sweat, my heart still racing. I don't know what it was. I don't think anyone could explain it. But I know this, I still see those lights in my peripheral vision on empty roads. Still feel the vibration in abandoned areas. And I know if I ever have to drive that stretch of forest again, it'll be waiting. Some things in the woods don't belong to the road. And some trucks aren't meant to exist. I still hear the faint echo of headlights in my mirrors, even when the road behind me is empty. My name's Lucas Riley. I've been running long hauls across the northern states for 15 years, mostly in a 2020 Freightliner Cascadia. I know the highways, the rest stops, the gas stations, every mile marker like the lines on my palms. But that night, the highway stopped making sense. I'd been driving 14 hours straight, dead tired, eyes stinging from the glare of oncoming headlights, the road stretching endlessly ahead like a black ribbon. My load was critical, medical equipment bound for a rural clinic, but every nerve in my body was screaming for a break. My CB had been silent for hours. A lone voice somewhere far behind mentioned frost heaves near the border. Then nothing. Static. Silence. I pulled up my map and spotted a rest stop, just a few miles ahead. A place to stretch, get a hot coffee, maybe a quick sandwich. Relief hit me in a wave. My rig groaned under the cold, exhaust trailing in the icy air. I switched on the heater, cranked the radio, anything to feel alive again. When I turned off the highway exit, the world shifted. The map showed a standard rest area, concrete, fluorescent lights, a handful of parking spaces. But the road I took didn't lead to it. Instead, the headlights fell upon cracked asphalt stretching into a small clearing. Frost covered every bench, every patch of concrete. The lights, faint, yellowed, hovered above the lot as if they were trying to guide me in. But there were no buildings, no signs, no shelter, just the empty, frozen expanse. I eased the truck to a stop. My engine throbbed in protest, tires crunching frost. The air smelled wrong, a mixture of cooked food, sharp and greasy, and something metallic beneath it, like a cafeteria left on too long. combined with old engine oil and ozone. I coughed, rolling down a window. No wind moved. The smell clung stubbornly, thick in the cab. I stepped out, boots crunching over frost. There were vending machines lined up against nothing. Their glass rattled softly, like teeth. I approached, expecting to see soda cans, snacks, but the insides were empty. No labels, just shadows shifting under the glass. My reflection looked back at me pale, sweat slicked despite the cold. I shivered. I checked the benches. Frost covered them thickly. Every crack in the asphalt glinted with ice. And then I noticed the faint tracks. Not mine. Not vehicle tracks. Footprints. Bare, smeared, but with no human gait. They led toward the vending machines, then vanished. I backed away slowly, CB in hand, hoping to hear a familiar voice, a crackle, anything. The static returned, low and constant. Then, faintly, a voice. Not over the CB, but as if carried on the night itself. "Don't leave, stay." I froze. My heartbeat spiked. Rational thought tried to assert itself. Exhaustion. Hypothermia. Maybe someone playing a joke in the middle of nowhere. But I was alone, and the air felt alive with it, thick, pressing, suffocating. I climbed back into the cab. Tried the ignition. Engine hummed. Tires gripped. I shifted into drive and tried to leave. The highway had vanished. Every turn I made, every path I took, led me back to the same rest stop. Lights hovering over cracked asphalt. Frost-covered benches. The vending machines rattling like teeth. Each attempt to escape made the air heavier, colder, more suffocating. The smell intensified. Greasy food, rotten sweetness, metallic tang. My stomach turned. My knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. I checked my GPS. It was spinning. Every route I tried recalculated to the same coordinates, exactly where I was. No matter which road I took, I ended up back at the glowing lot. My eyes darted to the mirrors. Nothing. No vehicles. No shadows. Just endless night. I told myself to breathe, to calm down. "You're tired," I muttered. "It's a glitch. Fog. Light reflecting wrong. Nothing supernatural. But the scent, the feel of the frozen air, the faint vibration under my hands, like the asphalt itself was pulsing, told me otherwise. Then came the sound. Not the engines. Not the CB. A low, rattling groan. From the vending machines, from the frost, from everywhere at once. I froze, listening. The machines rattled in a syncopated rhythm. Each vibration echoed through the cab. My steering wheel buzzed with it, a subtle thrum that I could feel in my chest as much as my hands. I glanced around. The lights above flickered, bright then dim, like a failing fluorescent bulb. And in that flicker I saw shapes, human-shaped or close enough. Figures emerging from the darkness at the edge of the lot. Shifting, bending, crawling almost like smoke, but solid. Faces indistinct. Movements deliberate. Waiting. Watching. I swallowed hard. My instinct screamed at me to drive straight through, to risk tires on frozen asphalt. I pressed the accelerator, tires spinning slightly on frost. The figures dissolved into the shadows. I passed the vending machines. Frost glinted like broken glass. And when I looked back in the mirrors, they were gone. But the feeling of eyes followed me, lingering in the cab, pressing at my mind. I drove, blindly, hoping to find the highway again. Fog rolled in around me, icy crystals scratching the windshield. The cab smelled like food and metal, like the lot had followed me. I hit the next exit, desperate. My rig fishtailed on patches of ice. Every mile felt endless. Every mile seemed to loop. And then, the road straightened, black asphalt stretching ahead, familiar markings. The GPS flickered back to life. My route recalculated. The numbers made sense again. I exhaled shakily, but my hands continued to shake. The frost smell lingered faintly, just enough to make me glance at the empty passenger seat, half expecting something to appear. When I finally reached the next town, I parked at a diner and forced myself to eat. Hot coffee, toast, anything. The radio stayed off. My CB stayed silent. I stared out the window at the highway. No rest stop. No glow of lights on cracked asphalt. Nothing. Just the black stretch of road disappearing into night. I tried to explain it to myself rationally. Exhaustion. Optical illusion. Hypothermia. But nothing explained the smell, the vibrations, the way every road led back. Nothing explained the faint voice, the shapes at the edges of light, the machines rattling like teeth. I've driven that route countless times since. I've passed the coordinates on maps. No rest stop exists. Satellite imagery shows nothing but forest, frozen ground, and the highway. And yet, every time I drive that stretch at night, when frost glints on the asphalt, when the wind presses against the cab, I feel it, the pull of the lot. The smell of cooked food, metallic and rotten. The vibration of something alive in the concrete beneath me. I don't stop at rest stops anymore when I'm alone at night. I don't stray from main highways. I keep my speed steady. I keep my headlights on. And I avoid the lot, because some stops aren't meant to be used. And some highways, they don't want you to leave. I don't know what I saw. I don't know why it existed. And I don't want to know. But I remember every detail. The frost on the benches, the lights hovering over cracked asphalt, the rattling machines, the smell. I carry it with me every time I drive that stretch. Every mile, every turn, every long, lonely night. The road doesn't forget. And I don't think the rest stop ever truly lets anyone leave. My name is Daniel Hargreaves. I've been a long-haul driver for 27 years, mostly running northern routes where winter feels permanent and the roads don't forgive mistakes. I drive a 2018 Volvo VNL now, reliable, heavy, built to survive ice and distance. I trust it the way you trust a good pair of boots. That night, I was hauling medical supplies from Thompson Down toward Prince George. A tight delivery window, the kind dispatchers apologize for before they give it to you. It was 1:17 a.m. when I hit that stretch of highway. The weather had been clear when I started, cold enough to make the stars sharp, the sky brittle. The road was empty, black asphalt bordered by frozen trees that looked like burned matchsticks against the snow. My CB was low and lazy. A couple of drivers farther south were talking about coffee and fuel prices. Nothing unusual. The engine hummed steady beneath my boots. The cab smelled like diesel, old vinyl, and the faint sweetness of the orange I'd eaten an hour earlier. Then the fog came. Not the slow kind that creeps in from the ditches. This fog rolled down like a wall. 1 second I had visibility for miles, the next my headlights were swallowed at 20 feet. Ice fog. Tiny crystals suspended in the air, turning the beam into a solid tunnel of white. I eased off the throttle and tapped the brakes. Heart steady, movements practiced. You don't panic in ice fog. You respect it. The temperature gauge dropped fast. The cab felt colder even though the heater was still running. I checked the mirrors. Nothing behind me. No taillights ahead. Just me and the fog. That's when the shapes started forming. At first, I thought it was my eyes trying to make sense of nothing. The ice crystals caught the light in strange ways, thickening, thinning. But then I saw structure, height, proportion. Something standing just beyond the reach of my headlights, tall and narrow, like a person stretched too far. I slowed to 30. The shapes shifted as I moved, staying just out of full view. They weren't solid, not exactly. More like silhouettes carved out of fog, edges soft, centers darker. Humanoid but wrong. Shoulders too high, arms too long. Heads tilted at angles no living body holds for long. I told myself it was pareidolia, the brain finding patterns under stress. I've lectured younger drivers about it. Fog plays tricks, I've said more than once. Don't stare into it. But the feeling wouldn't go away. The cab felt watched. Not the vague sense of being alone at night, but the pressure of attention. Like eyes focused on me from every direction at once. The hair on my arms lifted. Goosebumps crawled up my neck despite the heat. The steering wheel vibrated differently under my hands. Not from the engine, but from the road, like the pavement itself had started to hum. Then the radio came on. Not CB chatter. Music. An old song. Soft at first, tinny through the speakers. I knew it instantly. A cassette my mother used to play in the car when I was a kid. Sunday drives, windows cracked, her voice humming along, slightly off-key. My hand shot to the radio controls. The display was dark. The cassette deck hadn't worked in years. I hadn't listened to that song since before she died. The volume rose on its own. The fog thickened. Shapes moved closer now, drifting through the ice like slow swimmers. One passed across the beam directly in front of my hood. For a fraction of a second, the headlights cut through enough to show depth. Layers of crystal forming ribs, a suggestion of a face without features. I braked harder. The tires hissed on ice. ABS rattled. The truck slowed but didn't feel like it was stopping fast enough. My pulse climbed, but my hands stayed steady. Years of driving taught me that panic kills faster than speed. The music changed. Another song. One I hadn't heard since my teenage years. A cheap radio hit that used to play while I worked nights at a gas station. The memories came with it. Grease-stained hands, cold concrete floors, the smell of coffee gone bitter on the burner. "Okay," I whispered. "That's not right." The fog pressed closer, curling around the cab like breath against glass. I could see shapes on both sides now, lining the road. Standing, waiting. Some were tall, some short. All of them angled toward me, as if watching the truck pass through their space. I checked the GPS. The screen flickered. The route line disappeared, then reappeared behind me, looping back on itself. The distance to the next waypoint began counting up instead of down. I blinked hard and slapped the side of the unit. It didn't change. The smell hit me next. Ozone. Sharp and clean like after a lightning strike. Mixed with something colder. Metallic. The scent of old air. Like opening a freezer that hasn't been touched in years. It filled the cab, overriding diesel, plastic, everything familiar. The music stopped. For one blessed second, there was silence. Then a child's voice began to sing. Not from the radio, from everywhere. It wasn't loud. It didn't echo. It just existed inside the cab, woven into the hum of the engine and the whisper of the fog against the windshield. A nursery rhyme I hadn't thought about in decades. One my grandmother used to hum while washing dishes. I pressed the brake again, harder this time. The truck slowed to a crawl. The shapes didn't retreat. They moved closer. One stepped into full view directly ahead. It stood in the beam, fully formed from ice and fog, human-shaped but empty. No face, no eyes, just smooth, shifting crystal where features should have been. But I felt it looking at me, not with curiosity, with recognition. The steering wheel went heavy in my hands. The vibration faded, replaced by a strange numbness, like the truck and I were disconnecting from the road. The engine sound dulled, as if wrapped in thick cloth. My ears popped. The world narrowed to the fog, the figure, and the quiet singing. I thought of stopping completely. I thought of opening the door. The idea slid into my mind fully formed, calm, reasonable. Step out. Let the truck idle. It'll be fine. Just for a moment. That scared me more than anything else. I shouted, just a sharp, wordless sound, and slammed the accelerator to the floor. The engine roared back to life. The vibration returned, violent and real. The truck surged forward, tires biting into something solid again. The figure shattered as I hit it, breaking apart into a burst of glittering ice that washed over the hood and vanished into the fog. The singing stopped. The shapes pulled back, dissolving as I passed, retreating into the white. Some lingered longer than others, stretching as if reluctant to let go. The fog began to thin, not all at once, slowly, like a curtain lifting inch by inch. Stars reappeared overhead. The road lines sharpened. The GPS snapped back into place with a chirp. Normal mileage. Normal route. I drove another 10 miles before I trusted myself to slow down. At the next rest turnout, I pulled over and sat there with the engine running, hands shaking on the wheel. The cab smelled normal again. The radio was silent. The heater blew steady, warm air. I checked the clock. According to the dash, 20 minutes had passed. According to my logbook, nearly an hour was missing. There were no skid marks behind me, no sign I'd stopped in the road, no ice on the hood, despite hitting something that should have left residue. I finished the run. I didn't tell dispatch. I didn't tell the other drivers. What do you say? That fog remembered your childhood? That something out there knew which songs would make you slow down? I've crossed that highway dozens of times since. I've seen fog again. Ice fog, thick and fast. But never like that night. Still, every once in a while, when the CB goes quiet and the road stretches empty ahead of me, I keep the radio off. I focus on the engine, on the wheel, on the simple fact of moving forward. Because I know now that some fog doesn't hide things. Sometimes it brings them closer. And sometimes, when the air gets too still, I swear I can hear a song I haven't played in years, waiting for me to slow down. I've been driving trucks for close to 30 years now, and in that time I've seen plenty of strange things on the northern highways. Mirages in the fog, sudden shadows at the edge of the road, lights that had no source. But nothing ever shook me like the logging road near Timber Creek. My name's Hank Marlowe. That night, I was running a flatbed through northern Montana, hauling steel beams to a remote mill. I was driving a 2016 Kenworth W900, the cab heavy with the scent of engine oil and my old leather jacket. It was just after 11 p.m. The moon was hidden behind clouds, and a thin mist was rolling off the creek that ran parallel to the logging road. The asphalt ended, as it often did on these northern stretches, giving way to dirt, roots, and deep ruts. I was alone, and I had been for hours. CB chatter had fallen silent aside from a few distant trucks exchanging half-hearted greetings. The smell of wet earth and pine filled the cab as I eased onto the old logging road. From the start, it felt off. The trees on either side were close, older than I'd ever seen. Gnarled, massive trunks with branches like reaching fingers. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating patches of moss and fallen logs, but the deeper parts of the woods vanished into blackness. It was quiet, too quiet, like the world had stopped breathing. I drove slowly, scanning the shadows, when I noticed something. Movement. A flicker at the edge of the beams, shadows darting between trunks just out of full sight. I slowed further, heart rate climbing, telling myself it was deer, maybe raccoons. But the movements were deliberate, human. Then I saw them, just glimpses at first. Figures in the gaps between the trees working. Silent, methodical, axes lifted, swinging down with no sound but the ghost of motion. I froze, gripping the wheel tighter. My breath misted in the cab, cold despite the heater running full blast. "Who's out there?" I muttered, mostly to myself. No response, just the wind whispering through the pines. I rolled the window down a fraction, hoping to hear something, anything. The air that hit me smelled of sawdust and sweat, strong, fresh, impossible. The logging road had been abandoned for decades. The mill shut down years ago, equipment left to rot, trees reclaiming the land. Yet there it was, the unmistakable, sharp, almost metallic scent of freshly cut wood mixed with human exertion. I wanted to turn around. Part of me screamed to get back to the highway, to the warmth of civilization. But another part, call it curiosity, stubbornness, or a refusal to be scared, kept me moving. Every bump in the road, every crack in the asphalt, felt amplified in the cab. The steering wheel vibrated oddly, not from the rig, but from the ground itself, as though the earth beneath the tires was alive. Then came the fleeting glimpses, shadows between the trees that moved in sync, figures bent over invisible logs, swinging axes, working in perfect silence. I blinked and they vanished. I slowed even more. The headlights, even at full beam, couldn't fully illuminate the road. But sometimes, in the edge of the beams, I saw a face, or what I thought was a face, peering at me, pale, expressionless, unmoving, before dissolving into shadow. I tried the CB, hoping for a friendly voice, some rational interruption. 18, anyone copy? Static. Then, faintly, a whisper carried over the channel. Hank! I froze. My name, spoken clearly, deliberately through the static. I fumbled with the dials, switched channels. Static. Nothing else. Just the road, the trees, and the mist curling like fingers across the tires. The farther I went, the road seemed to warp. Mile markers weren't right. One sign read 12, the next 12 again, then 11. The ruts in the road seemed deeper, more overgrown than I remembered from satellite maps. I couldn't see the end. The forest stretched endlessly, shadows bending and twisting in ways that made no sense. The smell of sawdust grew stronger. The sweat mingled with it, sharp and metallic. My hands were slick on the wheel, goosebumps crawling across my arms. The rig's vibration under my fingers faded, replaced by an almost imperceptible shuddering, like the world itself was moving beneath me. I slowed to a crawl. Then, just ahead, I saw it more clearly. A man, or something like a man, stood in the road, axe in hand. He didn't move toward me, didn't flinch, just worked, raising and swinging as if cutting an invisible log. His clothes were tattered, covered in sawdust. His face pale, features obscured by shadows, yet eerily human. I braked, hard, but he didn't flinch. I threw the rig into reverse, the tires biting at mud, but the road behind me had changed. The ruts twisted differently, roots protruding where there had been none. I spun the wheel, trying to escape the road that no longer felt real. But the trees pressed closer, taller, bending slightly as if leaning in to watch. Every step, every movement I made mirrored itself. Figures appeared and disappeared in the headlights, always at the edge of vision. I could feel their gaze even if I couldn't see their eyes. The wind carried whispers, words I couldn't fully understand, like chants from a distant memory I'd never lived. The steering wheel vibrated again, softly at first, then sharply, as if the rig itself was warning me. My pulse hammered. The headlights illuminated one final figure in the middle of the road, a young logger, maybe 20, swinging an axe in time with an invisible rhythm. And then, the moment I thought I could pass, he vanished. The road ended abruptly. Overgrown, choked with decades of decay, saplings and moss reclaiming the path. No trace of the figures, no visible exit. Yet the cab still smelled of sawdust and sweat, heavy and real, as though someone had just been working there moments ago. My hands shook on the wheel. I sat for a long time, engine idling, heater rattling weakly against the cold. The forest was quiet, too quiet. I reversed slowly, finally finding the highway again. The trees receded, the fog lifted slightly, and the familiar stretch of asphalt appeared. I drove on in silence, the engine's hum and the distant calls of night animals the only sounds. The CB remained dead. When I reached the next rest stop, I stepped out of the cab. I smelled it again. Faint, lingering sawdust, almost imperceptible in the cold night air. No tracks, no figure, nothing but the muddy tires and the distant murmur of the creek. I've tried to rationalize it. Exhaustion, stress, tricks of the fog, hallucinations after long hours on empty roads. But I know what I saw. I know what I smelled. I know the weight of their presence. And I know the way that logging road no longer feels like a road. Sometimes, when I'm driving at night on quiet stretches of forested highway, I think of that road. I imagine the shadows moving between trees, axes lifted, working in silence. The forest doesn't let go. It waits. It remembers. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the headlights catch the edge of a shadow in a curve, I feel it again. The smell of sawdust, the metallic tang of sweat, the vibration of the earth beneath my rig. And I know that, somewhere, they're still working. The logging road exists even if no map can show it. The figures exist, even if no one else can see them. And I carry it with me, every mile, every shift, every long night on these northern highways. I don't stop for shadows anymore. I don't stray from the asphalt. I drive, silent, alert, and aware that some roads hold memories older than asphalt, older than steel. Roads that watch. Roads that remember. Roads that never really let you leave. And every time I pass the turnoff to Timber Creek, I feel it. The ghosts are there. Always there. Waiting. Watching. Working. Because some roads never die. And some workers never leave. I've been hauling freight up and down the northern highways for more than 2 decades. My name's Roy Callahan, and I drive a 2019 Kenworth T680, a rig that's as familiar to me as the back of my calloused hands. I know these roads, the dips, the bends, the hidden stretches where the asphalt seems to vanish into darkness. But every once in a while, the road reminds you that familiarity doesn't mean safety. That night, Highway 63 reminded me in a way I'll never forget. It was a heavy rain, the kind that hammers the cab roof and turns your windshield wipers into a relentless metronome. The highway was nearly empty, mile markers blurred behind sheets of rain, and headlights bounced off puddles that had formed in depressions along the shoulder. I was hauling a refrigerated load from Edmonton to Fort McMurray. Time was tight. The client had insisted on early morning delivery, and I was pushing through the night to make it. CB chatter was minimal. A few distant voices discussing slick curves, someone warning about a washed-out bridge up ahead. Mostly static. I was focused on the road, the engine's steady hum beneath me, the scent of diesel and wet asphalt filling the cab. Then I saw him, a figure on the shoulder, soaked to the bone, hood pulled tight over his head, thumb extended in the universal sign of a hitchhiker. My first thought was caution. Highway hitchhikers are rare and usually trouble. But he seemed insistent, alone, cold, hungry, maybe. I eased my rig to a stop, careful on the slick asphalt, and unlocked the passenger door. He climbed in without a word. His movements were too calm, too deliberate. I offered a nod, the heater blasting warm air into the cab. He didn't respond, didn't speak, just sat there, staring straight ahead, hood shadows hiding most of his face. I tried to break the ice. "Stormy night," I said. Nothing. Cleared my throat. "Name's Roy. You headed anywhere?" Still nothing. Then he started talking. At first, it was subtle. Observations about the route. "The north curve coming up's tricky when it's wet," he said. I blinked. His voice wasn't harsh or mocking. It was calm, precise, almost clinical. I laughed nervously. "You've driven this road before?" He didn't answer. Instead, he began reciting details only someone who had lived my life could know. "You moved to Edmonton in '95. First truck was a '92 Peterbilt. You lost that route after the accident near Peace River. Your sister's name is Claire. Your boy's name, Liam. He's 8 now. You're still sleeping with the same faded plaid blanket you had in Calgary." I laughed nervously, trying to convince myself it was some strange coincidence. But the details kept coming, faster, sharper. He knew things about me, things I'd never told anyone, not a dispatcher, not my brother-in-law, nobody. And the way he said them, there was no blinking, no hesitation, just a relentless, calm certainty. I tried to engage him, to ask, How do you know this?" But every question died on my lips. He never looked at me, never flinched. It was like talking to a shadow that had memorized your life. The rain intensified. Wind slashed across the windshield, turning the wipers into frantic wings. The hum of my engine felt wrong somehow, echoing oddly in the cab. I reached for the CB, hoping for a voice, any voice, to interrupt this growing sense of wrongness. Static. And underneath it, almost inaudible, I thought I heard my own name. "Roy!" I swallowed hard. "Who's there?" I muttered, fumbling with the dials. Silence. Just the rain hammering the roof and the faint, steady voice of the hitchhiker reciting more fragments of my life. Places I'd been, mistakes I'd made, routes I'd abandoned, the names of my parents, my ex-wife. All of it. Precise. Correct. Time lost meaning. I don't know how long I drove like that, listening, gripping the wheel tighter as my knuckles turned white. The rain blurred the road, headlights bouncing off slick asphalt, and every mile marker seemed to flicker, jump backward, then forward again. The cab felt smaller, colder. Goosebumps ran across my arms and neck. I tried rational explanations. Exhaustion, stress, long-haul hallucinations, maybe a trick of the rain and the fog. But nothing explained the way he knew me. Nothing explained the absolute stillness of his figure, or the certainty in his voice. By dawn, the highway began to lighten, fog lifting to reveal stretches of snow and ice. I glanced at the passenger seat. Empty. Just my radio resting there, soaked from rain that hadn't touched the interior. My eyes darted to the shoulder. No footprints. No sign that anyone had ever been there. The hitchhiker had simply vanished, leaving no trace, no evidence, just the lingering chill in the cab and the echo of every word he had spoken. I stopped at the first diner I came to, shaking, needing to confirm reality. The waitress asked if I was okay. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I ordered coffee, black, and stared at the rain-soaked highway through the diner window. Nothing. Empty asphalt stretching into distance. A few trucks crawling north like ants. No hitchhiker. No lingering presence. I thought about the CB. About the whisper of my name beneath the static. About the things he knew, things no one outside of my family or my closest friends could have known. And I realized, with a pit in my stomach, that I wasn't imagining the details. I remembered them. Every word, every route, every life fragment he had recited. Weeks later, I tried to tell another driver. Someone experienced, someone who'd driven these northern runs as long as I had. He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Could have been exhaustion, Roy. Long nights, bad weather, your mind making sense of it. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But I know what I saw, or rather, who I saw. Since that night, I haven't picked up hitchhikers. I avoid the shoulder when it rains. And I always check the passenger seat, even on short stops. Every time a storm hits Highway 63, every time I pass the curve near the old logging road, I feel it. The brush of wet air, the faint scent of rain on someone's coat, the weight of someone silently knowing me, watching me. I've tried to explain it away. Maybe he was a psychic, a con artist, someone who had studied me. But the way he spoke, never blinking, never hesitating, it wasn't human. And the vanishing? No footprints, no water stains on the asphalt outside the cab. Nothing. I've driven that highway countless times since. I know every mile, every bend, every rest stop. And still, sometimes, when the rain comes and the night is empty, I swear I see a figure in the hooded jacket, standing on the shoulder, waiting for someone to stop, waiting to whisper secrets only I know. Some nights, I wonder if he follows me. Not in the physical sense, but in the way the mind remembers things, in the way roads and weather can turn familiar landscapes into mirrors of memory. Every time a hitchhiker thumbs a ride on a rainy highway, I flinch. Every shadow in a puddle, every reflection in a mirror feels like him. And the worst part? I still hear the voice sometimes. Beneath the static, beneath the hum of my rig, beneath the rain slapping against the cab. Just soft enough to make my blood run cold. Whispering my name, recounting details only I should know. I don't know who or what he was. I don't want to know. But I know this. Highway 63 keeps its secrets, and some hitchhikers carry knowledge that should never be carried. Knowledge about you, about your past, your mistakes, your family, your life. Knowledge that follows you long after the rain has washed away their footprints. I still drive that rig, still run those northern routes. But I never stop for anyone on the shoulder. Not at night. Not in the rain. And I never forget that night. I can feel the weight of someone knowing me, silently, perfectly, in the empty cab, even now. Because some encounters on the highway aren't accidents. Some people or things choose you, and sometimes they never leave. I'm careful now. I don't talk much on the CB. I don't make small talk with strangers. I check my mirrors obsessively. I watch the shoulder, and I remember, because Highway 63 has a memory, and so does the hitchhiker who knew me. Even now, when I drive alone through rain and fog, I can feel him somewhere behind me, watching, waiting, knowing, and I know one day I might see him again. I've been driving trucks for over 20 years, mostly through the Rockies and northern highways that see more snow than sun. I know these roads like the back of my calloused hands. The rig I was driving that night was my pride and joy, a 2017 Freightliner Cascadia. Midnight black, twin stacks, leather-wrapped wheel. I was hauling refrigerated goods from Spokane to Fairbanks, a route that eats at your patience with its icy curves and wind-whipped passes. It was just after midnight when I entered Frostbite Pass. The temperature was well below zero, the kind of cold that gnaws through gloves and makes your breath look like steam from a kettle. Fog hung in the valleys like a living thing, curling up against the peaks and spilling onto the highway. My headlights cut through it, illuminating the slick surface in narrow beams, but the edges of the road disappeared into gray nothingness. I'd been on this stretch dozens of times, yet something about that night felt different. The usual CB chatter was quiet, too quiet. Normally, a few night haulers would be trading jokes or warnings about black ice. But tonight, nothing. Just the static hum of my radio and the constant whisper of the wind against the cab. I passed the first mile marker and did a double take. Something wasn't right. The marker read 23, then 24, then 23 again. I shook my head and muttered to myself. Fatigue, I thought. You've been rolling since 6 a.m. Give it a rest. But the feeling lingered, that subtle tug of unease that seasoned drivers learn to trust. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was a trick of the fog. A pair of headlights, bright but diffuse, appearing in the distance. Then I realized it wasn't oncoming. It was in my lane. A semi, a mirror image of mine, cruising steadily ahead. I blinked, adjusted my mirrors. There was no driver, no silhouette, nothing. Just the truck, moving like a shadow with headlights that cut the fog in cold, steady beams. I hesitated, then slowly fell in line behind it. My heart was hammering, but I told myself it was probably some late-night trucker. Maybe new, maybe tired. I tried the CB. 18, you copy? Static hissed back. But there was something else underneath it. A whisper, faint but unmistakable. Mitch! My name. I froze. Who's that? I murmured, gripping the wheel tighter. The voice was soft, distorted, like it had been dragged through 1,000 miles of static, yet clear enough to make my blood run cold. I flipped the CB switch, tried again. 18, come back. Who's that? Silence. Only my own breathing and the low groan of tires on ice. I glanced at the truck ahead. It was closer now. Its cab reflected my own rig perfectly. The dent on the fender, the scratches on the passenger door. Every detail matched. It shouldn't be possible. No one could know my truck that well, not on this stretch of frozen highway. And yet there it was. I tried to pass. Headlights swept over the fog, but the truck seemed to match every move I made. Left, right, slight deceleration. It mirrored me with unnerving precision. Goosebumps prickled my neck, and the cab suddenly felt too small, too close, as if the air itself had thickened. Then came the smell, ozone and burnt rubber, sharp and metallic. My rig was in perfect condition, but my nostrils burned with a scent I couldn't place. It clung to the cab, to my gloves, to the fog itself. I rolled down the window and tried to taste the night. Cold air, yes, but underneath it something electric, wrong. I kept following, unable to break the spell. The fog thickened around the rig ahead, and the road seemed to stretch endlessly, the mile markers blurring into a loop. I checked the GPS Frostbite Pass. Normal route. No exits, no detours. But the numbers were repeating. 23, 24, 23, the same as before. My radio crackled again. Static, then a faint melody of engines revving. But no one was there, and the whisper returned. Mitch, don't look back. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But some instinct in my gut told me to keep my eyes forward. Keep moving. I did. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, knuckles white against leather. The rig ahead suddenly drifted slightly to the right. I followed. Left. Accelerate. Decelerate. Every action mirrored. I could see my own reflection in its chrome mirrors. The lines of my face, drawn tight with exhaustion and fear. And then, just for a moment, I thought I saw movement inside the cab. A shadow, maybe, leaning toward the wheel. But when I blinked, it was gone. Time warped. Miles crawled and stretched at once. And then, just as abruptly, the truck vanished. One second it was there and the next, nothing. Headlights swallowed by fog. Mirrors reflected only the empty, endless road. I pulled over at the next exit, hands still shaking. The tires crunched over fresh snow, but when I stepped out, I saw the tracks. 2 parallel lines leading straight into the white. Only they weren't 2. They were mine. Every single track reflected my tires, perfectly, leading into nothing. No other rig had passed. No other driver. I called the dispatcher. No one reported another truck on that route that night. Just me. I drove the rest of the way in silence. Not speaking, not touching the radio, just listening to the engine and the wind, trying to convince myself it was exhaustion or hallucination. But every time I close my eyes at night, I hear the hum of that engine behind me, see the glow of those phantom headlights cutting through fog. Frostbite Pass is real. The rig is real. And if you're driving alone late at night, you might see it too. Just don't look back. Because some things on the highway aren't meant to be caught in your mirrors. And for me, I still hear the engine behind me every time the CB goes quiet.